Good morning everybody, good morning, it's JPR and welcome back to another video. We've finally reached the long-awaited ending of the worst/best type series, and today we're taking a look at the final 4 regions, Unova, Kalos, Alola, and Galar, to determine which types are the best. If you're new to the channel and you missed the previous 3 parts, I highly encourage you to check those out first so you get an idea of how we're doing things here. I now have a handy-dandy little playlist for you on the channel. And also, if you've been watching these videos and enjoying them and you're not subscribed yet, make absolutely sure you do. We got more great stuff coming out soon. I will do my very best to fill the void left by this series, although I hope you're not that attached to it, like you knew it was gonna be short. We're still coming up on 100,000 subscribers, so let's finally make 2021 the year. It's been a long time coming. Anyhow, introduction stuff aside, let's jump into the video. First up is the Unova region. First type I want to take a look at is fighting, since many people were predicting this to be the best type for Unova. Unova definitely boasts a ton of great fighting type Pokemon, including Conkeldurr, Sock, Throh, Mienshao, Emboar, and Scrafty. You can even catch the Swords of Justice during the main story as a little bonus too. Any of these Pokemon would make a great addition to your team. They're also probably the best type for the final few battles in Pokemon Black and White, since many of N and Ghetsis' best Pokemon all share a weakness to fighting. However, in both the base games and the sequels, fighting has to overcome a very rough patch in the middle of the story. Berg, Alisa, and Skyla are very problematic for fighting types, and they're borderline unusable in the Celestial Tower unless you have Scrafty. They don't perform particularly well against Chantal or Grimsley in the league either. In both games, fighting ends up with a 5-8 record, making them far too polarizing to be the outright best type. Like in the Johto region, Fairy type would be excellent in Unova. In fact, in base Black and White, Fairy would have a spectacular 6-0 record. Even with Colress and Roxy being added in the sequels, they could still easily be Unova's best type. But the same problem with Plasma before, that being that they just don't exist. And even if they did, in base Black and White, the only fully evolved fairy in the entire game would be Whimsicott, and since grass is so bad in Unova, it likely wouldn't be as smooth as it sounds. Which leaves me with the 2 types who will duel it out for the best, Rock and Steel. Let's break both of these down. In base Black and White, Rock ties for the overall best coverage record with 6-2, only losing to Clay and Marshall along the way. However, an issue with this is that Unova's Rock types are very hit and miss. While Crustle, Caracosta, and Terrakion are incredibly reliable, Archeops' results vary wildly due to his defeatist ability, and in the main story, Gigalith really just feels like a less versatile Crustle. They have somewhat similar stats and the same primary ability in Sturdy. Not having Sandstream hurts him a lot here. But the big hit to Rock comes in Black and White too. Since Rock types aren't available by the time you fight Sharon, and Bryson has retired as a gym leader, Rock effectively loses 2 of its winning matchups and gets another one tacked on by Colress and his Steel types, leaving them at 4-3. Speaking of Steel types, between Klinklang, Escavalier, Ferrothorn, Bisharp, and Excadrill, who is arguably the most powerful non-legendary in all of Unova, there is no shortage of good ones here. Since Excadrill is the only Steel type available by the time you reach Alisa, that makes one of their would-be bad matchups quite favorable. So in base Black and White, they hold the same record as Rock, 6-2, losing to the same 2 guys who beat Rock, Clay, and Marshall. In Black 2 and White 2, we do have to call Alisa an overall loss though, since there are many more Steel types available in the early game, and Marlin gets added as a slight loss. Even though they no longer beat Bryson in the sequels, there's no reason to worry since they do beat the new gym leader Roxy and perform remarkably well against the new champion Iris. With a 7-4 record, they still hold on to the top spot, unlike Rock, which faltered quite a bit in the sequels. The cherry on top is the return of classic powerhouses Metagross, Lucario, and Magnezone. The only noteworthy Rock type who returns in the Pokedex in the sequels is Tyranitar, but he's a post-game exclusive, so I don't quite understand why he's in the dex to begin with. With great Pokemon in both games, the best type record in both the originals and sequels, and versatile options, Steel easily claims the title as Unova's best type. Well, I hope you guys like Steel types because it's not even close in the Kalos region. With an 8-3 record, Steel wins it back-to-back, this time in a total landslide. Not counting Viola, since Steel isn't available that early in the game, they defeat Grant, Ramos, Valerie, Olympia, Wolfric, Drasna, and champion Diantha, while only losing to Karina, Clement, and Malva along the way. The next best type is Fire, which trails 3 wins behind at 5-3. I would say this is the closest thing to a dominant type we've gotten since Gen 1 Psychic, and we haven't even listed the notable Pokemon yet. Aegislash, Ferrothorn, Escavalier, Bisharp, Magnezone, and Scizor. And let's not forget about Lucario and Mawile, who gained ludicrously powerful Mega Evolutions this generation. Even if Lucario is the only Mega usable in the main story, he's basically all you need to curb stomp this entire region. Kalos also makes an effort to push fairy types to the forefront due to them being absent in the previous 5 generations, by giving them a gym, their own trainer class, and ultimately being the final obstacle the player faces in the battle against Diantha. While their prominence definitely hindered the effectiveness of dragon types and dark types, this just made Steel all the better. Steel even got nerfed this generation, losing its resistances to dark and ghost type moves. Not that it really matters here since those types aren't used by any notable Kalos trainers. The only slight bump in the road I'd say is Team Flare since they use the occasional fire type Pokemon, and Lysander's ace Pokemon is the water type Gyarados. I guess Team Liquid just wasn't as catchy. But even this problem isn't as nearly as big as you would expect it to be. Although you fight 31 Team Flare grunts throughout the entire game, only 4 of them actually use fire-type Pokemon. As for the higher-ups, only Scientist Mabel and about half of the admins use fire-type Pokemon, so in total, that's 10 out of about 50 Team Flare battles where you'll actually be at a disadvantage with Steel, or about 20% of the time. Despite their name, they actually lack a surprising amount of flair. I don't think there's too much else to talk about here. Steel type is just incredibly solid throughout the Kalos region, and nothing else really comes close. Moving on to the Alola region, in base Sun and Moon, Fairy is unquestionably the best type, with a 4-0 record. In my opinion, Fairy might be even a little too good in these games. Their lineup consists of Primarina, Rabambi, Whimsicott, Sylveon, Wigglytuff, Clefable, Alolan Ninetales, and Mimikyu, and those are just the really good ones. You still have quite a few options that I didn't even name. Fairies will dominate the first Grand Trial against Hala. Nanu, likewise, has no answers for them. If they so much as breathe on Totem Komuo, he will die. And out of Guzma's entire team, the only moves that will do substantial damage to Fairies are Golisopod's Razor Shell and Masquerade's Air Slash. The only trainer in the game who has a shot at taking down a team of Fairies is Plumeria, but you only fight her twice, and out of those 2 encounters, the only move she has in either that can deal super effective damage is her Golbat's Poison Fang in the second match, which is about as severe and problematic as your shoe coming untied. But Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon do shake things up a bit. First of all, they at least bother to give Plumeria's Salazzle Sludge Bomb instead of a pitiful double slap. Totem Vikavolt also gets subbed out for Totem Togedemaru in the Electric Trial, and it even calls in a Skarmory for support. Totem Komuo gets a Roselli Berry slapped on it, making it much less probable that you'll one-shot it with a Moonblast this time around. Its ally Caesar also gets buffed from level 32 up to level 46, and drops Metal Claw in favor of Bullet Punch, which I'd argue is more useful anyway. And finally, Mullane gets added as an Elite Four member, stripping away one of Fairy's winning matchups and replacing it with a much worse one. As for the Ultra Dex expansion, I'd say Florges is the only notable Fairy to return, so it's safe to say the Ultra games were very strict about balancing Fairy types. Which means a new best type would rise up and fill the void. Do I even need to say it? Yeah, it's Steel again. Hippity happity, this video is their property. While Steel starts off pretty rough, losing to Hala and Totem Marowak, they hit a hot streak beating Totem Lurantis, Kahuna Olivia, and Totem Mimikyu soon afterward. While Totem Komuo and Kahuna Hapu do cause them some trouble, they make short work of Totem Rabambi and Team Skull's leader Guzma, before heading off to the league where they win again against Olivia and do quite well against Acerola and Kahili. I also can't overstate enough the importance that Steel resists all of Ultra Necrozma's moves, making that particular fight so much easier than it is for most people. Yes, Fairy is immune to Dragon, but he does have Smart Strike in his moveset, so that's kind of a problem. Most of Steel's best Pokemon also reside in Alola, including Magnezone, Lucario, Bisharp, Scizor, and Metagross. There's also some neat new ones like Alolan Sandslash, Dugtrio, and Togedemaru who add some variety to the pool. A lot of people asked why I thought Psychic was the worst type in Alola because they happen to have Metagross on their team and he worked just fine. Well, now you know, it's certainly not because he was a Psychic type. It's also just generally easier to play to your Pokemon's advantages than to be a dummy and use them in a clearly unfavorable matchup. So just keep that in mind if you're one of those people who said, I used a Volbeat in Hoenn and he was awesome, so you're wrong. Like, good for you, you have a brain. It doesn't make your Pokemon's type any better though. Anyway, I'm gonna have to split this one just like I did in Unova's worst types. In base Alola, Fairy certainly reigns supreme, but once again, Steel makes an impressive comeback for the title in the Ultra games thanks to the many nerfs to Fairy and the addition of some important fights where Steel is a near necessity. And finally, the Galar region. Once again, there are 2 types in contention. First up is the Ground type, and the other is... come on now, say it with me, the Steel type. We'll start with Ground. Ground beats Kabu, Gordy, Raihan, Marnie, Rose, and slightly beats Leon, though it does depend on the starter you choose. Ground loses the first 2 gym battles against Milo and Nessa, and the third loss comes against Melanie. However, this loss is avoidable if you play Pokemon Sword version. As for Steel, they beat Milo, Opal, Gordy, Melanie, Raihan, Marnie, and Bede. Now I know, I read out 7 people that Steel beats, which is more than ground 6, but remember that you can't beat both Gordy and Melanie at the same time, so realistically Steel also beats 6. And just like the ground type, Steel is able to dodge a loss against B by playing the opposite version, Pokemon Shield. This means that both types hold a very impressive 6-2 record in their optimal versions. Looking at the Pokemon both sides get access to, this contest gets even tighter. Ground has Mamoswine, Mudsdale, Golurk, Sandaconda, Hippowdon, Flygon, and just like in Sinnoh, every water ground-type Pokemon is present here, excluding Swampert to his DLC. In fact, I'd argue that the last group is even more effective in Galar than they were in Sinnoh, since water is probably the 3rd best type in Galar with a 3-1 record, only losing to Milo at the very beginning of the game. If you get any of these guys, it's over. On the other side of the coin, Steel still has access to Klinklang, Ferrothorn, Bisharp, Escavalier, Lucario, Aegislash, and Caparajah. Excadrill is another excellent Pokemon, but he's both ground and steel type, so he's basically working as a double agent in this scenario. Unfortunately, as you probably noticed, 2 of Steel's greatest staples, Magnezone and Metagross, sadly did not make the cut for the base game, which is a pretty big loss for the type overall. But nonetheless, the roster is still very solid. However, I think I gotta give the tip of the hat to the ground type here. I believe their line of Pokemon is marginally better, and between Leon, Chairman Rose, and the many battles against Macrocosmos, they really pull through in the late game. I would say Steel is actually the slightest bit better in Shield, but if I balance the two together, overall it would lean in favor of ground. It certainly doesn't help that you have to fight B or Alistair twice in both games. As stated earlier, ground does a lot better against B, and is marginally better against Alistair since he uses Chandelure in the league, and his ace Gengar is weak to ground-type moves. Remember, he lost Levitate last gen. I know, I'm still getting used to it too. This is definitely the closest that any two types have been overall, though. I would say ultimately it just comes down to your preference in Pokemon and how you build your team. So, once again, for the best types in every region, Kantos is Psychic, Johto's is Fire, Hoenn's is Fighting, Sinnoh's is Water, Unova's is Steel, Kalos's is Steel, Base Alola is Fairy, Ultra Alola is Steel, and Galar is Ground. With a little bit of Steel. And as an added bonus, I'd say that throughout all the research I conducted, the overall best types in the Pokemon world are probably Steel and Fairy. These types just have a ton of good things going for them, generally good Pokemon, both have an immunity and some really good resistances, and overall it just seems like there's not a lot of types they struggle to deal with. They're actually remarkably well balanced between offensive and defensive capabilities if you ask me, and Zacian being both of these types at the same time is probably one of the many reasons that Pokemon is so good. Anyway, this was actually a ton of fun to do. I really enjoy breaking down every region to see what made certain types so good or so bad, and I'm glad to see that many of you enjoyed it as well. Like I said before, make sure to subscribe if you liked the video, because we got some other really cool stuff coming in the near future. That's it for me. I'll see you guys next time.